Okay, our next presentation will tell us how to compete in an omnichannel world using in-store behavior analytics. Our speaker is Rajeev Sharma, founder and CEO of VideoMining. Rajeev, take it away.
Thank you, John. So today's topic, I'm going to talk about the two worlds, the physical world and the digital online world, and show you the disparity that exists between the two worlds that makes it so difficult for manufacturers and retailers to sort of handle the complexity. And the goal is to show how in-store behavior analytics, which is a relatively new form of data analytics, is a key to connecting the two worlds, the physical world and online world, and gives us an ability to compete in the omnichannel world. So today, my talk is divided into 4 parts. The first, we'll kind of reiterate the changing and morphing retail marketplace, both because the shoppers are changing and because the retailers, both online and physical retailers, are changing so fast. And then we talk about the disparity in the information between the two worlds and how and what are the things that are needed to level the playing field so that you can actually handle the complexity of both the physical and online world in a similar framework. And a key to that solution, of course, is shedding more light into what's going on inside the store and using the data that is similar to online world, and therefore you can have the same kind of analytics that you have in the online world in the physical world. So we'll talk about the in-store behavior analytics as a solution to that problem. And then to illustrate that, we'll show 3 concrete examples of how manufacturers and retailers are able to use that analytic form in the physical world to compete better. So start with the obvious. I mean, the retail physical channel is not dead. It's still a more than $1 trillion market in the context of CPG retail, the consumer packaged goods manufacturing and retail. Enormous amount of money, more than 20% is spent in some kind of trade promotions, shopper marketing, and because most of the shoppers are making decisions inside the store. So despite the prevalence of digital as well as physical media and different forms of retailing, much of the decisions are still being made in store. And depending on the category, on average, more than 90% of the transaction still happens in the physical stores. And it's true that the online world is expanding faster and innovating, but the key point for the online retail is that it actually has an advantage of inherently capturing the tracking movement of all the shoppers on the website. And therefore, the analytics is kind of built into the retailing process. And therefore, it has the advantage of basically using that data, browsing data, tracking data, to be very efficient and optimized to begin with. And that's where the disparity comes in. And we'll talk more about that. So we all kind of know that the complexity of retail is basically growing exponentially, largely because of the mobile technology, which makes it easy for shoppers to kind of go online and research against competition. And not just information, but actual transaction, because now there are so many different ways to do the transaction, it's actually compounding the problem. And as a result, the retailers have been adapting fast and furious to make sure that meet the needs of convenience for the shopper and the ever-growing need for instant fulfillment, as well as competing to create a better shopping experience. And one thing common among all the retailers, especially the physical retailer, is that they are trying to adapt the store or change the store so that they can actually respond to the changing environment. And just to drive home the complexity of that, just let's look at the world from the shopper point of view. If you can think of 4 quadrants, the right side being the physical channels, the left side being the digital channels, the upper side being the shopping channels, and the bottom side being the information or media consumption channels. So if you think of physical retail, at least in the CPG context, you have grocery stores, C-stores, mass, drug, dollar, club, and others. These are the places where still a majority of the actual purchases are happening. But obviously shoppers are also going to the left side, to the digital channels, and either transacting while they're in the store or mostly at home or at different places. Likewise, for the media consumption side, you have the traditional channels like the traditional media of TV and radio, but also the physical coupons that are still out there, as well as other sort of media inside the store, for example, in-store TV. And then you have the digital channels, which are truly interactive, mobile, and obviously all kinds of things from digital coupon down to social media. So we have this sort of 4 groups of classifications of channels for both information and transaction. And obviously there are lots and lots of players in each of the market, and the traditional players sit in this space, and they are increasingly showing the presence on the left side on the digital channel. But just to drive home the complexity that exists today, for example, let me pull up a pen. So for example, if you are a shopper and you start out, let's say in Walmart, and you're looking for a product, and then you do a search, and you kind of go to a transaction site to see the similar product, then you might just while you're there, you see some kind of coupon that tells you to look at a competitive product. And you may actually go back into the store and see whether what features that particular product has. And while you're doing that, you might come across in-store TV that talks about a competitive product. So suddenly, out of nowhere, you are in a span of maybe 30 seconds, you have crossed across the four quadrants, from a physical transactional space to digital transactional space to digital informational or ad space to the physical ad space. And then you might come back and either buy the third product in the physical store, or you may just go back to the digital transaction site and do the transaction. So this complexity of not only existence of such channels both for shopping and information is the fact that you jump around all the time using the mobile device. That has compounded the problem. And as a result, shoppers' behavior has become increasingly complex and frankly changing at a pace that none of us could have predicted. So it's not as simple as staying in one of the quadrants. You have to kind of constantly think of ways people are jumping around, and obviously retailers are responding by having presence across all the different quadrants. But from the shopper point of view, it is becoming easier and fluid across all these channels. So that kind of highlights the complexity that the shopper faces today. And just to kind of reiterate that, the main thing is that fluid omnichannel experience. Shoppers are seamlessly moving from online brick and mortar to different aspects of searching, shopping, and buying, whether they're inside the store or at home or anywhere else. But the problem is that the online world has all kinds of data about you, especially as you're moving around, and they can serve data based upon your past movements and your profile and your behavior. Whereas in the retail world, and the physical retail world or the brick and mortar retail world, much of the analytics is still dependent on sales data, loyalty card data, and household data. And that's where the disparity exists. And we have to just see how you can level that playing field. So just to kind of reiterate that point, in the physical retail, there is no shortage of data. I mean, physical retail, brick and mortar retail, in fact, has been one of the biggest users of data for a long time. So there's plenty of data around in the sales side. Likewise, there's no shortage of consumer data. There's lots of new ways of capturing consumer data online and crowdsourcing. But what's missing is the actual moments when the shopper is inside the store. This is what is missing. And for example, who is shopping? We might have household information, but we don't know exactly which member of the household is shopping. Were they exposed to a particular marketing stimulus or display or in-store TV or even the product? If they were exposed to a particular display, did they engage with it? And how long were they engaged? Did the engagement lead to something? And did they actually end up looking at the product, buying the product, or not buying the product? So all those questions that represents the activities that the shopper is actually having in the physical world, especially today when he or she may actually, while moving around in the store, already going in and out of the digital world. So like the example that you showed, he or she might be jumping around in all those quadrants. So that in-store behavior has become even more critical than in the past when it was a simple sort of one-channel behavior. So getting access to that data and analyzing that and understanding what's happening has become even more critical to place the physical retail in the omnichannel world, especially because the physical retail has to change in response to not only to make it more optimal, but also to compete in the omnichannel world. So that's the basic sort of need that we are talking about. The question is, how do you do that? So this is where the key idea is to do in-store behavior analysis and really sort of expose the blind spots, so all the other places where you did not know how shoppers are behaving, and that is enabled through technology. So let me show you a little bit of the example of that. We'll see that with a video. Okay. So what you see here in this video is an example of video analytics with a camera that's mounted from the ceiling and looking down and actually just observing, just tracking a shopper as that shopper. In this case, it happens to be a male. In this case, it happens to be in the frozen section of a grocery store where the person is actually moving around. He has a recipe book in his hand, and he looks around, and in this case, obviously, he's picking off what he's looking for and goes and selects the product and buys it. So the point for this video is that using technology, now you can access the actual behavior much like you would access behavior of shoppers who are on the website, who are browsing something, who click on something, and then go deeper into a website or jump around different pages, and then finally they drag, hit buy and buy the product. So that's kind of equivalent, digitizing the physical world and then applying the same analytics that is possible in the digital world. That's something that we'll be talking about. The only thing to observe is that while there are parallels, there are differences. When you are on a website, you don't have other people, heckling you all around you. So the real world, the brick and mortar, actually is even more complex than the digital world. So what you see here is the ability to track not just one shopper, but every shopper, so you can incorporate that into your understanding of how shoppers are shopping in a crowded environment. And it's not just at a particular location or a particular category. The technology now exists to be able to track you throughout the store, from the time you enter the store to the time you exit the store. So imagine the amount of data points you have every 10th of a second for the whole trip. So you have massive amount of data per trip, per shopper in each store. So essentially it means you have big data on the shopping behavior in the physical world. And that's the most sort of exciting thing that will happen in the analytics world for some time, because now with that, let me move to the next slide. With that, now you're able to unlock the power of this visibility. So just to kind of summarize the technology components, one is simply being able to track shoppers throughout the store, from the time they enter the store to the time they check out. In that case, you can look at all the sequences. You can see where they were exposed to a particular marketing stimulus, where they spend the time, what led them to potentially change their path and buy something that they planned for or did not plan for. So there's a lot of wealth of information in that total path inside the store. It gives you a macro view. It also gives you kind of the heat map or usage of the space so that you can optimize the space. And then you get to the detailed behavior, which is extremely important, because now with this data, you can actually begin to tell what was the consideration set, what are the process that was being used when you're comparing, especially in a CPG retail world, for example, in a grocery store, when each category is fairly complex and you have so many different choices. So you can actually see the decision process being played out in front of you. So data captures all aspects of it so that you can begin to see what sequence they used. Did they compare brand A versus brand B? Did they look at price? Did they look at features? Did they look at packaging? Was the category easy to shop or not easy to shop? So the same data can answer so many different aspects of sort of retailing, merchandising, category management, and so on. And then the third component is being able to do that not just in an aggregate way, but also by different demographic segments or loyalty segments or trip segments. So you can begin to understand each of the segments and sort of develop strategies for each of the segments. So those are the three key powerful components of in-store behavior data and analytics that brings the same kind of features in the analysis that an online world has. And just to drive that point home, we can just go a little bit deeper into the sort of metrics that enable that. So in a very simple way, you can think of just these few definitions or numbers. Store traffic, which is how many people actually enter the store. Aisle traffic, which is how many people enter a particular aisle or a region of the store. Category traffic is the number of people who pass in front of a product category. Shoppers are the people who are engaged in the category, who actively stop and start shopping. And buyers are the people who actually bought. So once you have these basic definitions or metrics to represent the physical store, you can begin to sort of draw the parallel with the online world. And here is a very simple way to do that. You can think of the sales funnel for the online retail on the left, which, for example, you can track the website navigation using all kinds of tracking data. You can see you have the data on when they click any different element of the website, and when they put something in a cart, shopping cart, and when they finally check out. So that basic set of metrics is used heavily in all kinds of analytics online. Now, in a parallel, in a brick and mortar, it would be you visit a store. So now you look at all the store navigation and how you not only come into the store, but how you navigate the store, the full store track that I just showed. And then once you engage, start looking at all kinds of things. What did you engage with? How long did you engage with? What did that mean? What is the decision analytics? So this part of the funnel is probably a lot more even complex compared to the left side. But we can see where the parallels can be drawn, looking from the top of the funnel to the middle of the funnel and finally to the purchase data. So for a very long time, both manufacturers and retailers are focused on the bottom of the funnel, just looking at the sales data and using that to predict behavior and looking at the share of those shoppers. But they had ignored all the processes that happen inside the store prior to that. And by having access to this part of the funnel, you can suddenly see that in-store or brick and mortar, channel begin to be laid side by side with the online, and you can begin to see and develop strategies, and particularly connected with ideas of conversion rates. For example, just looking at how successful you are in getting exposure to somebody who comes into the store. How successful are you in engaging them? How successful are you converting engagement into closing the sale? So basically exposure rate, engagement rate, and closure rate. And more importantly, when you lose somebody in that. So for example, in the online world, you have all kinds of analytics in when people abandon the cart, trying to understand and convert them back into being a buyer, or at least trying to see why they abandon the cart. Here, the equivalent would be if they engage and leave without buying, trying to understand what is the quantitative aspect of the leakage and why that leakage happens. So those kind of analytical framework really helps in bringing the retail, the physical retail at par with the online retail in terms of analytics. And certainly segmentation. There's obviously all kinds of segmentation in the online world. Similarly, there's segmentation in the physical world in terms of time of the day, types of stores, and so on. But basically being able to get access to the funnel data by those segments is the critical element of developing analytical framework. And I'll give examples of that. So basically the funnel is the key. The sales funnel, both on the online world and the physical world, are the key sort of way to equalize the playing field once you have access to that. But there are also other aspects. The way online has been so successful is really trying to understand your behavior. For example, referral tracking. URLs tell you where shoppers came from, what part of their path to purchase they were on. And then based upon that, you can develop marketing stimuli. And the examples we used earlier, somebody abandons a cart. You kind of know that they were interested in a particular thing, and maybe something was not right, whether the price, whether it was the feature. So you can obviously target them based upon that knowledge. So you can bring that same kind of analytics for the physical world by, for example, tracking how they are moving around in the aisle, tracking the sequences of how they moved around in the store. In other words, the aisle dynamics or the store dynamics. And that will allow you to at least develop strategies to cross-promote or to provide online or mobile coupons when somebody has passed some category and they did not buy from it. So you can have all kinds of similar strategies that you see in online or Amazon world all the time. Like you bought this, you will be interested in this. So ideas like that can be brought into physical retail from the online world. So that was a very quick sort of introduction to First, noting that there is a disparity in the information between the online and physical world, and then showing how in-store behavior sensing, and I did not talk about sensing, but basically using sensors like video and Wi-Fi, you can begin to capture the data on behavior and apply the analytics that I just pointed out. Now it's time to show you some examples of how...
Rajeev, before we move on, I have a quick question on what you presented.
Sure.
The question is the total store Wi-Fi tracking sensor passive, or do shoppers have to opt in via an app?
So actually, that's a very good question. Both possibility exists. So at least in our framework, we track in a passive way. So we actually track shoppers as long as they have cell phone and with the Wi-Fi on. They don't have to opt in. The reason is it's anonymous. We are not identify them as individual. Of course, you can have a different strategy where they actually have an app and they opt in which case you not only track them, we can also have the possibility of communicating with them while they're in the store. But for the analysis that we showed as examples, it is all passive tracking when you're tracking shoppers either using video or Wi-Fi in an anonymous way.
Okay.
Hope that answered the questions.
Alrighty.
So good. So now it's time to give you some examples of how the in-store behavior analytics can give you some of the same features that online world has. So the first example is introducing a new innovation in merchandising. So as you can imagine, as both the manufacturers and retailers are under extreme pressure to do something different in retail, there are all kinds of innovations that are being made in the more traditional industry like grocery. The question is, how do you evaluate that? And in the traditional way, the evaluation would be based upon sales data. You put some merchandising concept, does it increase sale or not? Unfortunately, the sale alone does not give you enough power to make an informed decision. So in this example, we did actual test, and I won't reveal the exact category or the customer, but what we showed was, again, the sales funnel. We showed, in this case, the funnel, let's say we start even at the category level. So if there are 100 people who came to the category, we showed that when you introduce the innovation, actually the category traffic happened to be 7% down in the 2 periods. So even though the category traffic was low, and a number of category shoppers was low, the product which was put in the merchandising innovation actually received a 400% increase in engagement, and the closure rate was much higher. So basically we were able to access the exposure rate and the engagement rate and the closure rate for that particular product leading because of the innovation. And therefore we showed that the innovation actually drove the engagement behavior and the closure rate. If they had just looked at the sales data, they would have actually basically understated the impact of the effectiveness. So in this particular case, we showed that the impact of the innovation was very high, very positive with respect to engagement and closure. And again, just to show that whenever you make any changes in the website, you not only just look at sales, but you look at all kinds of elements like browsing and click rates and so on. So this allows you to make much more informed decision, especially if the marketing may have different kinds of impact. You may have some other examples where marketing is intended to drive more traffic to a particular category, or to drive more sort of power to engage in a particular category. There are some categories that are looking for more impulse engagement. So you have different strategies or innovations for different parts of the funnel, and by having measurements along the funnel, you can actually quantify the impact of that doing A/B testing very quickly. So that was the first example, pretty simple example. The second example has to do with locations. It happens to be in C-store, which are in a convenience store. There's already very little space, and you have all kinds of displays everywhere. So one of the clients of ours wanted to understand what's the optimal location for a display. And we looked at multiple locations, and obviously the goal was, do you look for locations which have the highest traffic? Because that's the obvious common sense reaction, that let's find the location in the store which has the maximum exposure. But our data showed that the traffic, of course, varies in different parts of the store, but the closure rate, the engagement rate and the closure rate, in fact, varies even more dramatically. It has to do with how people come in with a particular mission. They go in for particular places in the store for a particular mission, and if based upon what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what sequence they follow, they might be more apt to engaging with a display. So long story short, we compared in the last one we compared two different locations and showed that one of the locations which actually has 32% lower traffic or exposure does far better in engaging and closing the sale. So in this particular case, it happens to be next to the coffee shopper. So we learned on the way that basically this particular product, which intuitively was not connected with coffee, happened to be very well suited next to coffee because the engagement rate and the closure rate was much higher next to that particular location. So the explanation could be either the way people are more open to exploring once you have a coffee in your hand, or it could be just any number of things that drive interest and closure at a given point in a shopper's journey inside the store. But the main point was that it was driven by facts and, basically empirically shown that one was far better than the other. So clearly there was a much better return on investment by choosing that, making a decision based upon the access to engagement and closure data compared to traffic data even. So that was a good example of exposure or use of funnel to optimize the location in the store. And we have many, many examples both in the large format and small format where location alone can create a differences in performance of as much as 200% or 300%. So given that both retailers and manufacturers invest so heavily on creating special displays or displays for creating the right solutions or impulse purchases, the analytics of location is extremely important for the physical retail. And again, you could have a similar thing in website. You can understand where should you put the banner, on the top, left, right, and the online retailers or online marketing companies are kind of already optimize it using actual data. A third example is a little broader. So, you probably have heard about millennials all the time, and you probably are sick of thinking about millennials. But the fact is that, we are asked to understand the behavior of millennials inside a grocery store. And one of the theories that people had was that millennials like to buy fresh food versus some of the packaged goods. So clearly they should be shopping more in the perimeter of the store, in a grocery store versus center store. So we tested that hypothesis using our program called Mega Study, where we look at millions of shoppers. And we actually found out that the actual facts were very different. Millennials, in fact, make up 54% of the millennials actually spend more time and shop more in the center store. In fact, they are the only age demographic group that are more than 50% in this particular metric. And this particular metric is basically, are they primary shoppers in center store versus primary shoppers in perimeter? So we came up with a very non-intuitive answer based upon the fact that millennials, in fact, like center store more than perimeter store, simply speaking. And this was very different from what you would have hypothesized based upon all the other things that you know about millennials. So the point for this particular case study or example was that shoppers are changing, and we have all kinds of theories about all kinds of segments. But let the facts dictate what they are actually doing. And once you make a decision based upon actual facts, you're likely to be correct. And frankly, observing in-store behavior using video or Wi-Fi is very objective. There's no bias based upon interviews or surveys. It's based upon hard facts, much like online retail does. So that's the kind of lesson from this particular case study. And we have many, many, many examples, I would say dozens of examples of non-intuitive answers based upon behavioral data. So kind of just to summarize, how do you close the loop between the physical and online world? Obviously, it's a huge topic. We're just addressing one aspect of it, which is in the omnichannel world, you want to leverage insights from both online and brick and mortar world. And the opportunity is really to continue to develop strategies for both sides, for both brick and mortar and online, and adapt based upon what you're seeing. The approach would be, don't use it based upon guesswork, but use it upon fresh data, because what was known about people 1 year back is no longer valid. People are changing as fast as everything else is changing, in fact faster. So access to real-time data and insights is even more important than ever before, and making fact-based decisions is critical because the stake is much higher. Right now, it's not a question of just having a slightly more return from a particular marketing investment. It's more about how you define yourself in the omnichannel world, whether you're a manufacturer or whether you're a retailer. So that's kind of the summary of my presentation, and I'm sure John will open it up for questions. We may have some time.
Sure, we have some questions here, Rajeev, that came in. One interesting question, how do you see things like click and collect changing the industry?
So I think the first thing would be how quickly people adopt that. As obviously it has been done for the convenience factor. So the first thing would be how quickly shoppers are actually adopting it, and what we see is potentially the role of store changing based upon that adoption rate. Probably the physical spaces which are there in the retail, either to collect or do other things at the same time, will surely change based upon that paradigm. So we should brace ourselves for some physical changes in the store based upon the click and collect and other omnichannel strategies for delivery.
Okay. You mentioned trends with millennials shopping in center store. How are you able to determine that?
So very good question. So this is based upon technology. As shoppers step into the store, we have proprietary technologies that do facial analysis of the shoppers and classify them into demographic group based upon age, gender, and ethnicity, so that we can tell whether they're male or female, whether they're Hispanic, non-Hispanic, or the different age generations. And then we put an anonymous tag on that person and then track them throughout the store. So if you look at the millions of tracks that you saw, we can actually segment them by one of 32 demographic groups. So for millennial analysis, we would just pull out the hundreds of thousands of millions of tracks or behavior data for millennials, and then see their behavior with respect to the rest of the population to understand them, how they're different from a particular segment. That's how it's done through technology.
Okay. Another specific question, what channels do you work with and what retailers do you work with?
So I'm not at the liberty to talk about specific retailers, but certainly from a channel point of view, we already saw two examples from the C-store where we work with more than a dozen C-store retailers. We have a syndicated program which is now into the 10th year in convenience. In grocery, we do work with major retailers, the top few retailers. And again, we have a program, which is a channel program, which is now running to the 7th year. In fact, we made an announcement just today about the 7th mega study. But we also work in all other channels, the mass, drug, dollar, and others, pet or specialty retailers, any channel of interest to CPG. It might be more on a custom basis rather than a sort of syndicated ongoing data collection. So the short answer is every channel of interest to the CPG. And the longer answer is that there are some retailers and channels where we are tracking continuously, so we can develop long-term trends and do the analysis on the go or go back in time. With others, it will be more on an as-needed basis for answering a particular insights questions or testing a particular innovation.
Okay, one more question. In the spirit of achieving a seamless experience, how important is it to use parallel techniques or communication between brick and mortar and digital?
Parallel techniques. Well, I think it is important because people get used to different forms of communication as long as the parallels are done properly, understanding the behavior and needs of a particular moment, and at the same time recognizing that there are some key differences between brick and mortar and retail. You can't apply all the different communication techniques to brick and mortar and vice versa, but there are still a lot of learnings to be had between the two channels because people fundamentally are the same. Understanding sort of their hierarchy of needs and placing it on both the channels is going to be very important to create this seamless experience between the channels. And that's my
excellent.
2 cents.
Okay. That's worth a lot. That's all the questions that have come in, Rajeev. Great presentation. Everyone talks about e-commerce, but obviously in-store shopper behavior is critical also. So thank you very much. Those in the audience who would like to follow up with Rajeev can certainly go to his website at videomining.com, and also his direct email address is on the screen, rsharma@VideoMining. Also, Jeff Hershey's email is up there. He was unable to make the session today because he has the flu, but we had a great presentation. Thank you, Rajeev.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.